Well, that brings us to the Bible's sexual position. And you're like, why didn't you just call it the Bible's view on sex? Because I think this is funnier. I really do. That's the only reason. The Bible teaches that, first of all, there's nothing shameful about sex. Nothing at all. That's a Puritan idea. That's from the 1700s, that sex is evil, it's shameful, it's for procreation, and that's it. So, read the Bible for yourself. I mean, you just see it's not just about procreation, it's about unity, it's about oneness, it's about pleasure. God designed this. Why is it so awesome? Because it had an incredible designer, God. God made, before the fall of humans, Genesis 1:28, God says, be fruitful and multiply. Just go for it. Have fun. And there's no shame. The man and the woman, Genesis 2:25, they were naked and unashamed. That was God's original design. Nothing shameful about sex. In fact, the Bible has such erotic language that most Christians won't teach it or even talk about it. Most Bible translations will hold back from teaching the true meaning of the text because it is so erotic, it would make people blush. Let's read some of those passages. Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 4. My beloved, this is the woman speaking, my beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings, maha, were aroused for him. First of all, the word hand could be a euphemism for something else. I'm not going to go there. This word, my feelings, maha, they translated my feelings. Tremper Longman, an Old Testament scholar, he says, most commentators recognize that the woman's lower erogenous zone is the referent here. How do you take this beautiful picture of poetry about godly sex and the woman's lower erogenous zone is the referent here? Song of, 14, verse 14. His hands, so this is the woman. The woman has no shame here, talking about this. His hands are rod of gold and set with beryl. His abdomen, again that word, maha, is carved with ivory, inlaid with sapphires. So let's do a little bit of lexical study here on this word, maha. This is from the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, hala. It has a semantic range. It can mean womb, inner parts, abdomen, or a man's loins. Can it be womb? It's a man. No. Can it be his inward parts, like his intestines, his heart? No. Why would it be covered with ivory, inlaid with sapphires? That's not what it's talking about. It must be abdomen, that she's looking at her husband, and he's got a nice six-pack, and it's like ivory inlaid with sapphires. I don't get the sapphires part, but maybe it's that he's got a real nice cut physique, and she's just, telling him about this. Well, as you read through this lexicon of all the different ways that this word is translated, this word is translated abdomen only here in the entire Old Testament. What does that mean? That means it's the man's loins. That's what it means. It means they couldn't quite bring themselves to say. And in verse 4, it was referring to the woman, same word. Here it's referring to the man. I mean, this is Tremper Longman and Dan Allender. The Hebrew is quite erotic, and most translators cannot bring themselves to bring out the obvious meaning. No kidding. The woman's description of the man's physical beauty continues with her praise of his arms and his sexual organ. In such an erotic poem, the line, at the least, is suggestive of, if not explicitly referring to, the man's member. His comment, I like his honesty at least. It's just, yeah. It's funny, you're like, oh, that's really pornographic for you to read that. And we're reading from the Bible. That's what we're reading from. Something pornographic. It seems like, in our culture, this is the language of a women's bachelorette party. Not that I've ever been to one myself, but, and this is 500 years before Plato. In the ancient Near East, women were objectified for their beauty, their objects. Men were never objectified. So men would use women. Women could never talk about men. In the Song of Solomon, it's the woman talking most of the time. And she's the one who's talking to her husband. It's a beautiful book. Well, we could talk about that all night. Well, when we read the Bible, it isn't prudish, nothing like that. But it does give certain boundaries for the realm in which we should engage in sex. So it's a good thing. It's a pleasurable thing. And yet it needs boundaries, like a fire, for example. You know, a fire in your house, in the hearth, that can be very aesthetically pleasing, it's warming, but it needs the boundaries of the hearth, the fireplace. You can't just put a fire anywhere. It has a certain place. A fire in the hearth is good. A fire in your house will burn down the house. So you can either be warmed by it or burned by it. And the same thing is true for sex. And, you know, some people say, well, why does the Bible put boundaries around sex? Look, everybody puts boundaries around sex. Everybody. Those boundaries are different for different people. But think of the Me Too movement. That whole movement is predicated upon the fact that we believe that there are certain boundaries that should not, ought not, morally cannot be crossed. And we affirm that. We say that's right. Why is that? Implicitly, what we're saying is sex has a moral value. We're not just saying it's a giving and receiving of pleasure. Okay, it's more than that. It's not less than that, but it is more than that. And so when we come to the Bible, we discover that the design, the boundaries, the hearth around the fire is marriage. That this gift from God is so incredible that if it's misused or abused, it could be incredibly damaging. And so there are certain boundaries, which is the boundary of a sacrificially loving, lifelong, committed relationship. And this is the environment in which you can have maximal sex, great sex, safe sex, where when you engage in sex, there's a bunch of vulnerability, there's intimacy, and I'm sure I don't need to even argue this to you. Some of the experience that you've seen yourself, where you enter in, where it's only part of the package, you know, it's only the physical. We're not committing financially. We're not even committing emotionally. We just want one part of this person, namely their body. But in marriage, we're actually, to use the term, that euphemism, we're going all the way. We're going all the way financially, spiritually, physically, emotionally. We're committing to the entire person, not just I want your body, I want you, is what we're saying. Sex is not just a physical bond, it's also a spiritual bond. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6:16, he says, "Do you not know that the one who joins himself to a prostitute is one body with her? For he says, the two shall become one flesh, but the one who joins himself to the Lord is one spirit with him." I don't know if you caught the parallelism here. To join yourself to a prostitute, notice the parallel, joins himself to the Lord when you come to know Christ. And then the other parallel, that you're one body with her. You become one spirit with him. What is this teaching? Well, obviously, when two people come together, they become one body. And then he says you become one flesh. Well, isn't that redundant? To say one body and then one flesh, it's basically saying the same thing. He's saying, no. When you come together in sex, there is a bonding of the body and the soul that happens. We study this in neuroscience, that oxytocin and vasopressin are released during sex. These are called the bonding hormones. That when you have sex with the person, you're biologically predisposed to bond with that person for life. In men, vasopressin actually has the effect of making you bond not only with the woman, but also with your children. In women, same thing. And so we're dealing with deep spiritual concepts here. Deep spiritual realities are being broken. And we're going from one partner to the next, that there's a piece of our soul that is sticking to that person that we can't get back. Now, our culture doesn't view it this way. You think of Igor Primoratz. He's a philosopher at the University of Melbourne. He says sex has no special moral significance. It is morally neutral. Peter Singer, philosopher and ethicist at Princeton University. Sex raises no unique moral issues at all. Decisions about sex may involve considerations of honesty, concern for others, prudence, and so on. If sex has no moral value, then what would it matter if you had honesty or prudence or concern? He says, but there is nothing special about sex in this respect, for the same could be said of decisions about driving a car. This is the perspective of a naturalistic mindset. If we're just physical bodies, then we're just colliding with each other, molecules in motion. And so what really is the special significance of sex? There is none. Sigmund Freud, the great atheistic psychologist, he said only the weaklings have acquiesced in such a gross moral invasion of their sexual freedom. This whole idea that you're going to commit yourself to a person for life. He says, oh, you're just a weakling. Is that true? Is it true that when we're just engaging in sex, so I guess it's just nothing's really happening, that was a fun night, and that's it? No, that's not what the research says. We read, for example, about hooking up. What is the research on hookup culture? For one, recent study says that this increased the likelihood of reporting suicidal ideation in emerging adulthood. That the more partners you sleep with, the more predisposed you are to thoughts of suicide. That there was a decrease, lower levels of self-esteem, life satisfaction, and happiness. Whoa, it's almost like what the Bible is saying here is true. That it's not just, if it was just pleasure, that would increase your happiness. This is lowering your satisfaction in life. There were higher levels of generalized anxiety, social anxiety, depression, and sexual regret for both men and women in hookup culture, casual sex. 89% drank alcohol before engaging in casual sex, 9 out of 10 people. Now, why would that be the case? If this is just something that's so awesome and so incredible, why do we have to get drunk before we do it? Now, some people would say, well, I'm not that kind of a person. I'm not somebody who's going to go have sex with a stranger at a party. I'm saving sex for somebody who's special. Well, this would be a mutation of this concept, which is referred to as cohabitation, to cohabit. That we're going to make not a marital commitment, but kind of like we move in together, we live together, we share the bills, but we won't quite go all the way. We won't quite make it to the point where we're going to say, yes, we want to get married, use that word. Seems like a good idea. Before you marry a person, it'd be good to actually, live with them for a little bit. Then you could discover, some of their problems and decide, you wouldn't buy a car if you didn't drive it first. And so maybe, taking a little test run, 6 months, a year, 2 years, where we cohabit and we see if we're really compatible. Is that a good idea? Not according to the research on this. The research is univocal, one voice on this. Think about, for example, depression. We compare cohabitation with marriage. Depression is 3 times higher in cohabiting couples than in married couples. Do you know how bad the state of marriage is in our culture? It's bad. Cohabitation is 3 times worse when it comes to depression. What about breaking up? The chances that that person's going to leave you, walk out one day, their stuff's gone. It's 5 times higher in cohabiting couples versus married couples. What about infidelity? The chance that your loved one would go and cheat on you, go out on you. It's anywhere from 2 to 8 times higher in cohabiting couples. So much for the idea that, well, it's just a piece of paper, marriage. It's just a piece of paper. If it's just a piece of paper, then why don't you get it? See, this is clearly showing there is an escape hatch here. If you aren't living up to the expectations, I can get out any chance I can get. What about the divorce rate? Now, how bad is the divorce rate? Bad, very bad. Some say 50%. Incidentally, Christians who go to a church service once a week, just doing that, not talking about their level of commitment to Christ or anything, their divorce rate drops from 50% to 38%. Not even talking about are you committed, but let's just say 50%. That's pretty bad, abysmal. What's the divorce rate for those who cohabit and then eventually move in together? So you're cohabiting and then you get engaged, then you get married. Twice as high. So if marriage is at 50%, twice as high as that. Marriage is already a risk. See, this is kind of the paradox here. There's a fear of people that I don't quite want to commit to marriage because it could end in divorce. So I'm going to cohabit so we don't get divorce. The only problem is that cohabitation leads to more divorce. What if you are a serial cohabiter? What if you live with the person, you break up, you move out, you move in with another person, you break up, you move out, and then you move in with a special someone? What's the divorce rate then? It is 4 times higher. So it's not twice as high, now it is quadrupled, the divorce rate in America. What about happiness? Marriage, 3 times higher. That's interesting, because that other study said that depression was 3 times higher for cohabitation. This study says that happiness is 3 times higher for marriage. It shows we're looking at the same picture here. So is this true? This whole idea here? No. No. You're not a weakling. In fact, may I argue that it takes an incredible, heroic stance of courage to stand up and to say, I'm actually, the next person I sleep with is going to be my wife. That would be countercultural. Our culture is the complete opposite. If you're going for sex and you're going for hookups and you're going for cohabitation, you're not being a nonconformist. You're conforming right along the way to the cultural script. That's what you're doing. You're reading from the cultural script. Well, the only person that's going to hurt is you. And I don't say that with any kind of condemnation in my heart, only with love in my heart. That this is painful. That when we go outside of God's design, that God forgives our sins, but he doesn't protect us from the consequences.